year 1785, Cambridge University held an essay contest. Now, it wasn't just for scholars, but you did have to write in Latin, and many people entered with hopes of winning this prestigious honor. And in 1785, the man in charge of selecting the topic decided to make a political statement. He asked essay writers to answer this question: is it lawful to make slaves of others against their will? One scholar who was determined to win the prize was a young man named Thomas Clarkson. Clarkson didn't care much about the topic, but he did care about winning prizes, so he dove right into the contest, did tons of research, and wrote and rewrote a world-class essay. And it was during this process that something changed inside of him, something touched him, and a thought came to his mind. He asked himself, what if the contents of this essay were true? What if every second of every day human lives were being destroyed, and I was letting it happen? Clarkson became deeply troubled. He wrote this: "In the daytime I was uneasy. In the night I had little rest. I sometimes never closed my eyelids for grief." Now, many of us know the grim statistics around African slavery between the 17th and 19th centuries, that the main destination for enslaved Africans was not America and its tobacco and cotton plantations. Only 4% of slaves came here. No, the big culprit was sugar, and the big player was England. Haiti, Jamaica, Barbados, Montserrat, Brazil, to name a few, were the major destinations of millions of slaves who for generations were sentenced to what was arguably the most horrible living conditions and heinous working conditions ever experienced by humankind, just so Europeans could sweeten their tea and make their hot chocolate palatable. The average Englishman at the time was consuming 18 pounds of sugar per year, and while he hammered the wood, sewed the sails, manufactured the rope for the slave ships, he was rather clueless about how his sugar actually got on the table, or how his prosperity was only possible by the suffering of millions of Africans. Thomas Clarkson was a man of conviction who took his Christianity to heart as one of those early abolitionists who saw what was really going on, and he was also clever enough to help stop it. Clarkson and other abolitionists embarked on a novel public relations campaign. They gave talks in which they brandished whips and handcuffs used on slaves. They published testimonials from sailors and ship doctors who described the atrocities and punishments on slave ships. Enterprising women began sewing handbags embroidered with images of suffering slaves, shaming everyone who passed into thinking about the blood price of sugar in their tea. Clarkson and others organized a boycott on what they called the blood-sweetened beverage. They started a fair trade campaign asking sugar producers from India to stamp their sugar packets with the words "produced by labor of free men," and convinced thousands of people to buy sugar from India and not the Caribbean. This abolitionist work would culminate in the passage of the English Slave Act in 1807, ending British trade in slaves. This milestone in the long, painful road of African liberation bears repeating on this festive holiday weekend, not because of its efficacy. Indeed, slavery did not stop in 1807, 1907, or 2007, but because it marked a moment in time when things got better. Humanity, for all of our heinous sins and wretched trespasses, has made progress in our oppression of others. That's why this sermon starts out on a note of hope, that the words and actions of good-hearted people can make a difference. And on this day, we cannot help but remember that as we visit another essay, one that did not win a university contest, but by its eloquence and prophetic perception has keen application to our place and time right now. You may have read it. It was written in 1852, not by a white Englishman of power from Cambridge, but by a freed slave from Maryland named Frederick Douglass. In What to the Slave is the 4th of July, Douglass asks us not to remove honor from our founding fathers, but to remember that their work was neither perfect nor finished. On the 4th of July, you and I recognize the dedication, sacrifice, and commitment of great men of a great age who brought to us a Declaration of Independence and a break with tyranny, that this nation might know freedom. The statesmen, patriots, and heroes who stood up for the principles of liberty, justice, and freedom, who loved their country above private interests, who were willing to go all in with all that they owned and all that they were, who understood what it was to put their lives on the line. They were peaceful men, but they would rather fight than submit to unjust oppression of their superiors. They were quiet men, but they would not stay silent in the face of oppression. They were men of order and organization, but they could not remain settled when injustice and unfairness abounded. And so we take a day to remember this great generation who stood up as individuals to fight in unity, to vanquish an oppressor, and to win an enduring order of beneficence and prosperity like the world has never known. But we must remember that the glory of this day is not shared by all Americans. We know that it brings reminders of freedom for some and of grave oppression for others. As Frederick Douglass so forcefully and eloquently put it, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than any other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which the slave is the constant victim. To him your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States." Douglass's motives were clear. He wants those in power to act as if they deserved it. He wants those who have power and wealth and status to act with honesty, justice, courage, and equity. He wants us to use our power not for greed, but for freedom. And he asks a 4th of July question that you and I ask ourselves right now. What right do we have to enjoy a child's share in the labor of our fathers, unless the children we have are to be blessed by our labors? What right do we have to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of our fathers by failing to win accolades for the work that is set before us? Friends, the greatness of our country is not a memorialized plaque to hang in a museum, but an unending quest that every generation must take up and pursue. That quest is liberty and justice for all. When we make the 4th of July only a day of relaxation and fond reflection on the work somebody else did, we betray their memories, shun their examples, and contribute not to the perfection of our union, but to its demise. We cannot come to this day satisfied that the average net worth of black families in America today is $17,000, 1/10 of what a white family's is. Their average net worth is $171,000. We cannot be satisfied that the black unemployment rate is about twice as high as the white unemployment rate. We cannot be satisfied that blacks make 87 cents on the whites' $1. If racism is defined as a system of advantage based on race, then we all know that this is alive and well today, that whites are a people of privilege. Our system favors the majority whites not because we're smarter, we work harder, or we're better. No, it favors us because we built it. It was founded by us, preserved by us, and perpetuated by us. And until we find ways to change that system like we say we want to make it fair, to make it equal, to make us truly free, the fairness, equality, and liberty we celebrate this weekend will continue to elude us. My friend Daryl, who is a light-skinned black, was a woman's shoe salesman. He worked at a store in a white neighborhood and had a particular customer, a white woman named Ann, who bought a lot of shoes from him. Now, for a short period, Daryl took a transfer to a store in a black neighborhood. When he returned, Ann asked where he'd been. When he told her, she said, "Oh, I'd never go shopping in that neighborhood." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because that's where those people live." After ringing up her order, Daryl turned to her, handed her shoes, and said, "Ann, I'm one of those people." She never came back to the store again. Our problem today is that racial preference has not disappeared, but so much of it has simply gone underground. The aggression of overt slavery, while still rampant in other parts of the world, has turned into microaggressions around us. It's no less putative, degrading, and despicable. Physical shackles and unholy whips are replaced by rundown schools, violent neighborhoods, mass incarceration, sparse opportunity, and deep-seated racist attitudes that keep blacks down and out. That keep blacks down and out. Do we think the current protests and the anger that fuels them just popped up out of nowhere? They are a cry of pain from a raw nerve that's been exposed for way too long. A month before the protests started, Pew Research asked Americans about their confidence in the police. 78% of white Americans said they had a great deal or a fair amount of confidence in the police. Young black Americans came in at 49%. A Monmouth study found that 44% of black Americans felt they or a family member had been harassed by police, compared to 24% of white Americans. 85% of blacks believe police are more likely to use excessive force against black people, while only 40% of whites thought that was the case. What we've crafted is a society that not only keeps whites at an advantage, but it deters us from speaking out. It rewards us for keeping quiet. Don't rock the boat. Don't say anything controversial. Go along to get along. But the time, my friends, for silence is quickly passing. What did Thomas Clarkson say? What if what we're hearing this morning were true? What if every second of every day human lives were being harmed and I was letting it happen? By the protests we've seen, it appears more and more Americans are feeling the same way. We are increasingly uncomfortable wrapping this holiday up in victorious red, white, and blue, and pining for some mythical yesteryear. It seems an increasing number of whites are no longer happy to harbor a sentimental reminiscence of a world that ignored grave inequalities and injustices, painting a flowery picture of Eden that frankly never existed. This yearning for yesteryear that's hinted at in the slogan, "Make America Great Again," is a hallmark for white supremacy, writes Robin DiAngelo, because those are the days when handsome, educated white men of means like me had more power. Ah, those were the days, too many whites have said. Yes, of redlining, segregation, limits on minority voting, Jim Crow laws, ghettos, racist media representations, one-sided history books, and societal condoning of the N-word. And we are awakening to this moment in 2020 that can be like the moment Thomas Clarkson had helped usher in. A milestone moment when real racial reform can be seen because we're all getting a chance to see, to hear, and to feel just how wrong things have been. Righting this wrong is the work Jesus invites you and me to do today as we hear those iconic words. Come to me, all of you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. This 4th of July weekend, we are invited to do our part to take that yoke, shoulder that burden, by taking the responsibilities of our freedom far more seriously. We are a people set free so that we might set people free, liberated so that we might liberate, blessed so that we might bless. Dear Lord, we pray that our hearts may be cut to the quick and realize not just the suffering around us, but the means we have to address it, that we may truly be a place that stands for liberty and justice for all. Amen.